there guys, gals, and non-binary pals, Jam Potter here, and today we are going over My Lady Jane by Cynthia Hand, Brody Ashton, and Jody Meadows. So this is part of the My Janies series. It's part of a series. And should you read this? Let's get into it. So, My Lady Jane tells the story of Lady Jane Grey. It came out in 2016. My first thought when I saw the book was, oh my god, it's the 9 Days Queen. She never gets any recognition. She's the one that falls in between Edward VI and Mary I. I think it's Edward VI. Henry VIII's son, Edward, and Bloody Mary. She's the one that goes in between those. That's where she falls, and she never gets any love or respect. I took a AP European history course in high school, and we didn't talk about her. I remember my teacher said, okay, so after Edward VI, then we had Mary first, and I said, yes. Actually, we had Lady Jane Grey, Lady Jane Dudley, depending on whether we're using her maiden name or her married name, which one we're going with. She's more famous as Lady Jane Grey. What about her? Well, what about her? She was the Queen of England for 9 days. And so she's one of my favorite historical figures, and she doesn't get any love. And I think that's part of why she's my favorite. Just like the reason why Ringo is my favorite Beatle is because he doesn't get the love and respect that he deserves. Lady Jane Grey doesn't get the love and respect that she deserves. That being said, this book made me angry, because they're the little bits on the cover are, sometimes history gets it all wrong. It's not easy being queen. Off with her head. And it's the comical, fantastical, romantical, entirely, but not really, true story of Lady Jane Grey. Lady Jane Grey, 16, is about to be married to a total stranger and caught up in an insidious plot to rob her cousin, King Edward, of his throne. But that's the least of her problems. She's about to become the Queen of England. That could go wrong. Okay. Anywhere on this that I've read to you, does it say anything about shapeshifters? Anywhere. No? They're called Athenians. It's spelled Idians, but it's the thorn, so it's a TH sound. I think it's a thorn. It's the one that looks like a D in algebra, like the algebraic D letter that you use in algebra and calculus, that's pronounced with a TH sound. I think it's a thorn. I might be wrong. Please correct me if I'm wrong. I'd love to know which one it is. But they have magical powers to turn into an animal. That's nowhere on the back cover, it's nowhere on the front. There's no anything that we're going to be talking about animagus or shapeshifters or loup-garoos or werewolves or none of that. In fact, Henry VIII in this universe transforms himself into a lion and eats the messenger. Hence the phrase, don't eat the messenger. So, I wasn't expecting that. At all. It was shelved in the historical fiction section at my local used bookstore where I bought it, which I understand is not the fault of the book, that's the fault of the bookstore. But it features real people who really lived and skirts around events that really happened. And reminded me of Netflix's Persuasion in the worst possible way, because it includes modern language here and there, but then resorts to these and thous and thines and all of that in other places. So the language isn't quite there, but it's not some characters talk like this and some characters talk like that, where it would be intentional. It's almost like the author forgot what she was doing, or he was doing, or they were doing. Because it took 3 people to write this. 3 people to write this. How? How did it take 3 people to write this? Please tell me. I've written books. I've only ever written books by myself I feel like I could write this in a NaNoWriMo, and I would then scrap it because I'd be embarrassed of it. Because it's not good writing, it's not good storytelling, it's not good character. It's historical fiction. Half the work is done for you. Half of it's done for you. Even if you wanted to make Henry VIII and Lord Dudley shapeshifters, even if you wanted to do that. Why? First of all. Second of all, half the work is done for you. It made me very angry, it made me very upset, it made me very frustrated, and instead of getting into the whole religious side of things, like the Catholics versus the Protestants and like that whole thing, they took that plot out completely. Well, not completely, because Henry VIII still got divorced. That's just a thing that apparently everyone was fine with. What they weren't fine with was shapeshifters. And it's shapeshifters that we have the problem with, not divorce and starting your own religion. So they turned it into kind of an X-Men allegory, almost. Like, it felt like they're like, hey, you know how X-Men was an allegory for, like, the civil rights movement? Let's do that. But in Tudor period England. Should you read this? No. 1,000 times no. And I'm sorry for the rant. To make up for it, let's go over some fun history facts about Lady Jane Grey. So Lady Jane Grey was the first cousin of Edward VI. She was the great-granddaughter of Henry VII. And she was married off by her cousin Edward to Lord Guildford Dudley. Guildford Dudley. Like Guildford Dudley. They change his name in the book because they feel like it. It's like they couldn't be bothered to look up what his first name was, and I think they changed it to Gifford. And it's like, why? Why did you change his name? Just because you felt like it? Like, that might be how Guildford is supposed to be pronounced. It might be like St. John, which is spelled St. John, but it's pronounced St. John. And maybe Guildford is supposed to be pronounced Gifford, but you could just tell me how to pronounce it. I'm a lame American. Like, you can just tell me this. Anyway, back to history. So, she's supposed to be the Queen of England instead of Mary I, aka Bloody Mary, so named because of her blood reign against the Protestants while trying to reassert the Roman Catholic Church. Prior to the Third Act of Succession, which made Henry VIII's, like, the Third Act of Succession made Henry VIII's 3 children legitimate. Like, before that, only Edward was going to reign, and then the other 2 were just going to get skipped. Mary and Elizabeth were going to get skipped, which is kind of interesting, because history does not tell that. But the Third Act of Succession reinstated Mary first and Elizabeth first. Poor Lady Jane Grey was tried for treason, found guilty, and beheaded in the Tower of London, leading to Mary I's rule. Her Catholic-centric, bloody rule. And later Elizabeth's Golden Age, which she may or may not have been just as bloody as Mary. She just had a better PR agent. Depends on who you talk to. I'd love to do more historical fiction and more historical stuff. But Lady Jane Grey was just a teenager. She was 17 or 18 when she was beheaded. Think about that. Think about what were you doing when you were 17 or 18? I was picking out colleges and taking statistics for fun and theater. Like, I was a band nerd and I was a theater nerd and I volunteered. Like, I was in no way ready to take over my city, much less a country, right? And she wasn't bred for it. She wasn't brought up for it. She wasn't ever supposed to take control of the country. In essence, she was a very sheltered child that this was thrust upon. She was commanded to marry, and then she was commanded to rule, and then she was commanded to die. And her whole life is just painfully unfair. And that is Lady Jane Grey. one of my favorite historical figures, especially from that time period. Like, I loved QE1 until I learned about Lady Jane Grey, and I'm like, she's so much more fascinating. And the fact that we don't know a lot about her because everyone thought she was just going to be skipped makes her that much more fascinating to me. So, if you like stories, short stories, prose, head on over to gmpotter.com. That is my website. I post there on alternate Fridays, and we have fun. So don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!